Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the second session of this parent resource, helping you guys out with technology and your students. We're trying to hit elementary through teenagers here and just trying to give you guys some tips and understanding around the technology world and media and how we try to navigate this as parents. My name is Trey Stubbs. I'm a licensed counselor in Broomfield. I'm also the clinical director at Sojourn Counseling. I also help out here at Flatirons Church with the care ministry and the recovery ministry called Shift. And so I'm really happy to be here with you guys. One of my specialties is working with teenagers and families through these very issues. And so it's really fun to be able to engage in this stuff with you guys. As I mentioned last time, and if you didn't see that, I really do encourage you to go check that out. It really is a little more stat heavy. It's really talking more about just the weight of this issue and why this is so important for us. And I started with kind of this comparison with a car and how I believe that technology is not necessarily a problem, but a context to parent in. And so just like we need to prepare our kids to be able to drive, we're trying to prepare our kids to have technology at their fingertips. So it's not something we're trying to block them from or trying to just keep them from for forever. Is how do we prepare them to do this well? And how to prepare them to even handle it well when they do something wrong, because very likely they're going to make mistakes, just the way that we are or we do when we drive. And so I want to just walk through some practical tips for you guys as parents to be talking about, to be thinking about, and then ultimately, hopefully, to be able to talking about with your kids and trying to implement too if you feel like you could use some adjustments in this area of your parenting and in your family. The first thing I want to talk about is that you need to know your values. Any person standing behind a microphone can communicate what they think their values are, what they think you guys should do. But you have your own. You have your own family. You have your own kids. And so there is no one right way to do this. You have to be thinking through it for yourself. I think the only wrong way to do it is to not do anything at all and to bury our heads in the sand. But the fact that you're listening to this shows me that you're at least thinking about it, that you are engaging with their stuff. And you can have different values or different opinions than I do. So it's a matter of how do you identify those for yourself. I'm going to start with 3 different C's. It's connection, content, connection, and commitment. And I want you to be thinking through these 3 things as you think through, what am I okay with my kids being exposed to? So the first one is content, right? What rating does this thing have? What rating does it hold? Is it an app that, typically those are going to be rated. Same with video games. Those are also going to be rated. Things that your kids watch on Netflix or YouTube also hopefully typically have some type of rating. And I think it's important that you guys have that in your minds and knowing what you're allowing your kids to be exposed to, especially when it comes to parental controls. When I was a teenager, I had just gotten an Xbox for the first time, and there were 3 games I had been told from my friends that I needed to get. The first one was NBA Live, 2K, and so it was just a basketball game that I really was looking forward to getting to play. The second one was Call of Duty, which is more so a shooting game, a war game. It had zombies in it that you would kill and things like that. And the third game I wanted was a game called Grand Theft Auto, and more of like a free player game where you can get in cars and drive around a city and kind of do different challenges throughout this certain city. And so I asked for these 3, and my parents had no idea what they were doing. Even at that point, Xbox was a relatively new thing. And so they got me all 3 games. It was at Christmas, and my uncle looked at one of the games and he said, Grand Theft Auto, this is rated mature. My parents were like, what is that? Like, what does that rating even mean? He said, well, it probably means there's some kind of either bad language or sex involved in this game. And my parents were like shocked that I would ask for this as like a 13-year-old boy. But so they made me return that game. But they decided in their own values that they were okay with Call of Duty. They were okay with that war-based game, and they were okay with the NBA game. So they let me have those 2 games. I think it's fair when parents say, we don't want our kids playing a war game, so we're going to not allow them to do that, but maybe we're going to allow them to play this other game. Once again, I think that's up for you guys to decide. But a few years later, when I was older in high school, I was over at a friend's house, and he had Grand Theft Auto, and we started playing it. And in that game, as we were kind of driving around the city, there was this stop that you could make at a strip club. And so you could literally have your character in this game go into this strip club. And I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, this is why my parents didn't let me have this game. This is why it's rated mature. Now, I don't know what in the world that game needed to have a strip club for, but that's the kind of stuff that my parents would have allowed me as a 13-year-old to stumble upon had my uncle not checked that out. It's important to know what content is in the game or what content is in the app. When we think about Instagram, you think about Twitter, those pages, those social media networks or platforms, they'll have really suggestive and sexual material in them. Sometimes they're going to have straight up porn in them. They're also going to have people who have pages that have pretty radical ideas one way or the other that you may not want your teenager or your 10 or 12-year-old to be exposed to. There are content things that we need to be aware of in those different platforms. Same with like Snapchat and TikTok, where they kind of are even consuming passively some of this content. So be aware. You should know before your kid downloads an app or before they start playing a game, what content is involved and where do you stand? Where do you fall when it comes to that content? When they're 8, when they're 12, when they're 16, when they're 18. Number 2 is the connection. Who has access to your kid in these games? Or they may be safely in their room or even safely in your own living room, yet have access from millions of people who would have access to them as this teenage kid. For some clients, I believe that the technology provides a really crucial community, a really crucial social aspect for them, and I've seen that play out very positively. So I think that the community that can come from technology can be a very good thing, whether that's in video games or social media. I think many of us adults would say one of the main reasons we have Facebook is so we can keep in touch with people from high school or college or see what our friends or families are doing. So the connection there is a very positive thing. But there also is harmful connection in who has access to your kids, who's trying to friend your student on Snapchat or Twitter, or who's following them, or the Facebook and TikTok and things like that. Same with the video games and who's talking to them through that chat. We need to be aware of the connection that the tech holds and aware of the conversations we need to have with our kids around that as well. How to be able to say no or to say no to someone who's asking to be their friend. How to receive something they probably shouldn't have received, but then be able to talk to you about that rather than just trying to hide it or make it try to go away. So you have the connection, you have content, connection, and then lastly, what is the commitment that this app holds? How much time does this game or app require or ask from your child? There are some games that are going to take a half an hour and they're pretty much done, or some videos or apps that really they only want to be on for 10 minutes and they can kind of turn it off. And there are also some games and some apps that just continue to ask for more and more and more content, more and more and more time from your kids. When I was once again playing those video games, it was a $50 video game, and you'd bring it home and you'd play it, and there wasn't a whole lot of internet stuff going on, so it was basically just playing that game. And the game manufacturer made $50 on the front end, but then it didn't make any money on the back end because it was just me playing the game. Well, now I think that developers have found out that they can actually offer those games for cheaper, sometimes even free, but then have in-game purchases that keep baiting your kids to be engaged in that game longer and longer and longer. They need to buy these different weapons or skins or different types of things in these video games to make them better at the game. So rather than just a $50 purchase on the front end, I know kids who have spent hundreds, if not even thousands of dollars playing different video games because it keeps baiting them into wanting to do more. It's also the developer's goal, right? They get paid based on how we engage with a post, how we engage with an ad, how long we stay on different posts for. If they can take more of our time, they ultimately get to make more money and get to have more success. So we need to be aware of the commitment that that thing is asking of us. How to also then block for us to, hey, we're going to have an hour, we're going to have 2 hours, or to have some type of time limit that's just established in the family so we know what the commitment is going to look like. As you identify your values and develop those, really think through what is the content of this, what is the connection, and then what is the commitment. Also, with the commitment piece, something to be aware of, and I hope this helps even a little bit with empathy for kids, is they are viewing this stuff as far as being an influencer or getting kind of famous from something or even trying to become a professional video game player. EA Sports is now a legitimate sport that there will be tournaments where people go and play video games together. I have a student who I was working with in my practice, and he was really frustrated with his parents because they wouldn't let him practice his video game because his goal in life is to become a professional video game player. And so he compared it to, well, they let me go practice basketball in the driveway, but they won't let me practice my craft of video games. When he was communicating that to me about a year or two ago, it kind of clicked in my brain like, man, teenagers are not just seeing this as simply fun or simply a distraction. Kids are also seeing this as a future. And so they were going to be frustrated with you when you put these limits on them as if you were limiting how much time they could throw a football in your backyard. That doesn't mean that you need to give them more time, but I do think you need to be aware of that as one of the reasons why they may hold on to it so tightly. There's also a student, I was a youth pastor back before I was a counselor and in grad school. And in my youth group, there was a student who was on an app called music.ly, which is what became TikTok. And he was making these videos and he was really good at it. And he was a 7th grade boy. And one time he came to a youth group and said, Trey, look, I've got 100,000 views on this post. And my jaw just kind of dropped. Like, what in the world? You've got 100,000 people watching this stuff. And ultimately, he continued to get better and better at making these videos to the point where he started traveling around like different malls and different cities with other male influencers. And they would kind of like have different kids come up to them and do autographs and stuff like that because they were like social media famous. Well, this student ultimately took some acting classes and he got a starring role on a show on Comedy Central that actually did pretty well. It's from producers of SNL. So this student is now, I think he's 16 or 17, 18 years old now, and he's a legitimate actor on a legitimate show on Comedy Central. And his videos propelled him into that. And kids see that, right? They have that hope and that dream for themselves. They see these other students and people making money off of being an influencer or making money off of streaming themselves playing these video games. Now, you don't have to accept that as a parent. You don't have to agree with that as a parent. But I hope you understand where your kids are coming from so that you can empathize with it and understand a bit deeper why they may care so much. Understand the commitment and get your own values, set your own values based upon that understanding. A couple other points to consider when developing your own values. What value do you place on family time, and how do screens impact that? What settings or standards are you putting in your home, on your devices, around dinner time, around when you're hanging out together? Are you spending individual time with your kids with no technology? Do you want to do that? Is that important to you as a family? Again, privacy settings, right? We could talk about this the entire time because there are so many different privacy settings with each app. But how much privacy do you want your kids to have? Some people want a 17, 18-year-old to have complete privacy where they don't have anything to do with it. Some people track their 17, 18-year-old kids and where they're going. Some people still have access to their phones. We recommend at least through elementary school to know everything that happens on the technology, on their phones or on their devices. And I would even argue through middle school and high school, it's important to have check-ins. One tip here is to say when you give your kid that phone for the first time, whether they're 10, 12, 14, 16, to say, this is my phone that I'm letting you use. So it's my phone, but you get to use it. You get to be in control of it, but it's still my phone. And if it's my phone, then I still get ownership in that. So I can look at it when I want to look at it. I get to know the code to get into it. I get to have access to that phone because it's mine that I'm allowing you to use. So then they don't own it as this is my thing. I am in full power of this. You don't get to look at it. It's my thing. And try to help me even switch that around a little bit. I also really recommend having check-ins where you have access to your kids' phones. I think that within a whole entire family, it's important that spouses have access to each other's phones and that there even can be a standard like phone lock setting where everybody knows the password to everybody's phones. Because if you're hiding something on your phone, your teenager is going to want to hide something on their phone. If you're hiding something on your phone, you ask yourself, why am I hiding this? What's going on for me in my heart that would make me want to have this be so secret? Now, I recognize sometimes with kids, you don't want them to have access to your phone is for business things and stuff like that. But in a lot of cases, I think it's important to be able to have that be an open place where they know and everybody knows that people have access to each other's stuff so there aren't those same types of secrets. Once again, that doesn't have to be your family value, but that is a recommendation that I have in my experience. It also, I think, helps kids have an out, right? So if somebody wants to send your 15-year-old something inappropriate, that 15-year-old has an out and say, hey, my mom or my dad, they check this. Don't send this to me because they're going to see it. Or even with tracking, and I can go either way. I've seen tracking be very beneficial. I've seen tracking even be harmful. But I've also seen tracking be helpful. And like if a 16-year-old, 15-year-old, the friends want to go somewhere they're not supposed to go, the 15-year-old can say, hey, my parents track my phone. They're going to see where we go. It actually kind of gives them an out. Now, once again, that's for you to decide as a parent on what you want. But it can be helpful to have those types of that accessibility to what's going on in your kids' phones and their video games. Even be able to listen to them play video games, because oftentimes they may have their own mic and they're talking. Do you know what they're saying? Do you hear the language that they may or may not be using? And so privacy settings, you need to talk through that stuff. And I encourage you, if your kids are young enough, to have those standards set before you ever give them the phone. And if your kids are already old enough that they've had a phone for a while, it's hard to pull them back on this. But if you can really clearly communicate your values and stay to them, it'll make that process just a little bit easier. What does communication look like? And then as well as ask yourself, what screens are most concerning? Right? Are we okay with the big TV screen in the living room, but maybe not so much with the phone? Or we're okay to have them have the tablet in the living room, but maybe not in their bedroom. I don't recommend that kids have access to stuff in their bedrooms. I think that it's dangerous. I think that it can open a lot of doors, especially late at night, that may not be helpful. Once again, it's for you to decide as a parent, but that's one of my recommendations. So first one, as parents, you guys have to identify your values. Number two, you got to get on the same page and then communicate those values to your kids. I think too often parents forget to explicitly communicate their values to their teenagers, to their kids. Boundaries need to be based on something and based on values that your teen has watched you even live out of or have watched you uphold. If they see you doing it, it's going to be way more effective when you ask them to do it. They may not always understand you. They may not always agree with you, but if they can at least understand where you're coming from, it's so much more helpful. Now listen, I think that as a parent, you have the right to say, because I said so. You have the right to say, you just have to listen because I said so. But I don't find that to be very helpful. If we can provide our kids the reason why we think something, the reason why we are choosing to have this consequence or this boundary or this rule, they may not agree with you, but at least they can understand it rather than just shutting them down with, because I said so. You have the right to say that, but I don't find it to be very helpful. As well as you guys, sometimes they may not be able to understand you or agree with you, and you may not agree with them, but I so hope that you can have empathy for them and their experience. Empathy for them and what they hope technology can become for them. Empathy in how they view themselves in light of that. To ask, why is this so important to you? Or help me understand what's going on for you. Help me understand why you care so much. Help me understand why you want your phone in your room so badly. Help me understand why you want a phone so badly in the first place. Help me understand why you want this video game. I was working with a family recently, and the teenager wanted a video game that had the mature level that the parents didn't want that teenager to have. And I was talking with him about just his frustration with his parents for not allowing him to have it. I said, well, present your case, right? Talk to your parents. Here are all the reasons why you want this and why you think you can be safe in having it. And then listen to your parents explain to you why they don't feel comfortable with you having it. And they went back and they had a really good conversation around why a parent felt the way they felt, why my client felt the way he felt, and ultimately, and this doesn't always have to be what happens, but they allowed him to have the game with certain controls and accessibility that he agreed to. And he was thankful they let him have it and to play it. And they were okay because they knew he was going to be safe because they were able to monitor what was going on. Or we recognize too that technology and social media can really impact mental health. We talked about that in the last section. But I want to read some stats to you from the perspective of teenagers. We don't necessarily agree with, but we need to understand. 25% of teens said they actually feel less lonely when on social media, while only 3% said they feel more lonely. 16% they said they feel less depressed compared to 3% said they feel more depressed. 12% said they feel less anxious compared to 8% said they feel more anxious. 20% say they feel more confident. Only 5% say they feel less confident in social media. 18% said they feel better about themselves. Only 4% said they actually feel worse about themselves. Right, now that's from their perspective. So we don't necessarily agree with those stats or see those stats being true in research, but we need to at least understand that's where they may be coming from. It'll help us be more empathetic to them. It'll help us listen to them better. And I so believe that teens want their parents to be authority. They want their parents to be in charge, but they want to be listened to and empathized with. They don't get to dictate everything, but if they can feel like at least my parents understand me, they don't have to agree with me. But if they understand me, those conversations go so much better. Because I spend so much time in my office helping teenagers and the parents just listen and understand each other. Not even agree with each other, but listen and understand. Frankly, I spend that much time doing that with couples as well in marriage counseling. You don't necessarily have to agree, but can you hear each other? Can you work on communicating well? That is so the key fabric of a good relationship, even when you do disagree. So I think parents who utilize these skills in communicating their values tend to be the most effective when they can have dialogue, empathy, and listening. So then once you've identified your values, once you have communicated those values, then you set your boundaries based on those values. And you set them and you clearly articulate those boundaries to your teens. So I want to give you guys some tips for consequences on how to actually be successful when you put those boundaries in place. First thing is, I think that parents struggle with is the consequence needs to match the crime. Right? The time has to match the crime. I think some parents can go overboard here because they're responding out of their own emotional place. Right? When your teenager or your kid disrespects you or goes against one of your rules, or you find something that's bad on their social media or whatever it is, and their initial reaction is this anger, I think, and fear and sadness. And so we react and say, well, it's gone for a month, or I'm taking it away forever. I think when we do that over and over again and we don't follow through on those consequences, eventually the teens are like, well, like whatever, I'll probably have it back in a day. Or if I go and steal it back, my parents probably aren't going to fight me on it, so I don't even really care to follow these rules in the first place. I don't trust that they're going to actually follow through on it. When we respond out of our own emotional place, we typically say things that don't serve us very well and don't serve our kids very well. The consequences need to be based on their values and need to seek progress behavior. When we overreact or we get consequences that we can't hold, we will not have much return on that investment. So I ask you, have you given yourself the ability to up the ante? Have you given yourself room to make the consequence larger? So if your first consequence doesn't work, do you have a next step? Are you able to make that a little bit harder, a little bit worse for the kid? If you don't have anything bigger to go than what you've already done, you may have gone too far, unless this has been going on for a long time. Tips I have for you guys in that is to set the consequence and the rules in place before the behavior happens. So they're working with a family of a teenage male, and he would stay out too late past curfew. He wouldn't really respect their boundaries with his phone. And what they would do when he came home an hour late at night is they would just be sitting there fuming because they were so angry with him for staying out, and they were also afraid of what he had been doing. And so he'd come home and they would take his phone away and they'd ground him for 3 weeks and they'd do all these things. But after a couple of days, they'd realize, boy, it's actually not good for him to be grounded for so long. Or man, like he stole his phone back and we don't really want to fight him again on how to take it back from him. And they realized their consequences were not working. So we worked with them on developing a plan and a measurable, actionable plan to actually make those consequences worse based upon his actions that he knew was going to happen. So for him, if he was 5 minutes past curfew, he was going to lose his phone for 1 day. They could hold him to that, and he knew they could. If he was half an hour late or more, he was going to lose his phone for 3 days. They knew they could hold him to that, and he believed that they would. And if he was up past that, so if he just kind of disappeared off the map or he was gone for more than half an hour, he'd lose his phone for, I think it was 2 or 3 weeks, which once again, they would hold him to. And so what happened was, next time he went out and his friend said, hey, give us 20 more minutes, he knew if he gave them those 20 minutes, he was going to lose his phone for 3 days. So what did he choose? He wanted to keep his phone, so he decided to go home. Now, it's not working perfectly because things don't tend to work perfectly, but that is way more effective for that family. And now the parent doesn't have to act emotionally or out of frustration or anger, but they set these standards because they went to the kitchen table, they talked it out, and they delivered these to him, and he even understood. They even let him have some input into it. Identify the behaviors you need to see, and then give yourself room to up the ante. I also so encourage you guys to reinforce positive development. When they do something good, when they come home on time, when they let you check their phone, affirm them for that. Don't just kind of do it like huff and puff, but thank you for letting me see it. Like, thank you for being so great this past week. Thank you for making it home on time. Like that really makes us feel loved by you, or that just calms us down. I so encourage you guys to reinforce the good things, affirm them for the good things. You'd be surprised how far that goes for a teenager. Research shows that a teen needs 5-to-1 affirmations to criticisms in order to keep afloat, in order to keep balanced. So if they're getting 5-to-1 negatives or criticisms from you, it's going to so negatively impact your relationship with them. How much are you affirming your student compared to how much are you criticizing them? And guys, focus on the relationship. Focus on talking not just about their grades and their behaviors, but talk to them about their friends. Know their friends' names. Know what they're into. Care about their friends. Talk about the sports and their interests. Ask them about what they're watching, their video game. Ask about like, what does this level do, or what does this gun do that's better, or what is this why do you like playing with this player on the sporting event? Whatever that is, ask them questions, not to try to get information, not to try to give them some kind of consequence from it, but just to have relationship. Relationships go farther than anything in here. I also encourage you guys to avoid extremes. Right, if you let them have like unlimited screen time over the summer, and then now that school is going back and you try to limit that down, it's hard to get back into it. So try to have some just regulation, some moderation. Right, we know that with anything in life, moderation is best. Right, with food, with anything, it's not about dieting and not eating anything and then binging and eating everything. But how do I try to just have a healthy diet, a moderate diet? Right, it's so true for our technology in our lives as well. I think the most effective parents are the ones who are able to learn to ride the balance and find middle ground with their teenagers. We also have to model this stuff. We can't ask our kids not to smoke cigarettes when we're smoking cigarettes, right? It just doesn't work out very well. So we have to model these behaviors. I think these rules are a we problem, not just a you teenager problem. This is a family issue, not just a kid issue. And so if you're not modeling these things, that I don't think your teen is going to want to model them very much either, or even your kids. So watch for that. Another piece, you guys, is that misdemeanors, they're going to happen. Your kids are going to make mistakes. You may make a mistake, and how you're trying to consequence or give out a consequence, or how you're trying to parent them, that's okay. But I hope that the misdemeanor is underneath your roof, or happens under your roof than somewhere else. Or that when they're out of your house and now you don't have any really input into how to respond to it. If your kid messes up and sends a picture they shouldn't send, or they're looking at something they shouldn't look at, or they're saying something they shouldn't say, I hope that you can help them walk through that, to understand why that might be harmful for them, how to help change that behavior in the future. So misdemeanors are going to happen, and when they happen, I hope they happen with your awareness of it, so that then you can walk your students through that. It's better to happen under guidance than under no supervision at all. And then look for continuous improvement, right? We can't be perfect, but look for improvement. So some practical tips based on age as well. They recommend that like under 18 months to just 2 or 3 years, really no screen time at all. Elementary age, the Pediatric Association recommended about 1 hour for elementary age kids. For middle school kids, they recommend up to 2 hours of entertainment-based media per day. And they don't actually even give a recommendation, as far as I'm aware, for teenagers, because I think at that point you have to have a lot more conversations around what works for us as a family, what works for them as a teenager, getting more of their input. But those are kind of some helpful things. Know that you don't have to have your kids be on the front end of this. They don't have to be the first ones to be getting this stuff. I don't believe they're going to fall behind in life if they're the last ones to have social media, or if they're the last ones to have a phone. I also think that waiting as long as possible, as long as you can for your family, just helps kick the can down the road a little bit. So I do encourage you to have patience with yourself, have patience with your kids. It's also easier to slowly release consequences or slowly release rules than to try to take them back, just like toothpaste out of the toothpaste tube. Like, it's much easier to take it out than it is to try to put the toothpaste back in. So try to maybe not just flood them with this phone and everything, but to kind of slowly allow them to have more and more privileges as times go on. But you guys, I think the bottom line here is that relationship is key. The kids are going to be more accepting of boundaries that you implement if they have a good relationship with you, if they understand where you're coming from, and if you understand where they're coming from. If they really truly believe that you're doing this for their safety and for their well-being. So parent out of love, not out of fear. Once again, I don't say this stuff to try to cause any fear, but rather to recognize this is a context that we parent in, not a problem that we're trying to solve. If you can prepare your kids for technology, just the way you prepare them to drive, I think they can be so good at it and so successful with it. They'll still make mistakes. They still may get a speeding ticket, but they know what they're doing. So make sure you prepare them for this stuff. Now, we're going to post a few more resources here as well, some different websites that I have found to be helpful, some different privacy settings, some different apps you can have for like internet filtering, to do accountability reports, some things like that. as well as we have the parent resource with the Flatirons page. We'll post that link, as well as if you have any questions, you can always reach out here to the care team. That's just care@flatironschurch.com. I'd love to be able to engage with you guys on this and help answer any questions you may have. I also do recommend sometimes having some counseling can be helpful, either for your kid if there is some kind of addictive piece going on, or you're struggling to be able to communicate well with your family, or even just how to show empathy to your kids. There are resources out there. That's something also you can find through the care team here at Flatirons Church to help support you guys. We appreciate spending this time with you. Once again, I so affirm you for spending the time to listen to this, to engage with this stuff. Take your own time to engage in what you feel like is going to be best for your family, and hopefully you can utilize some of these tips to start to pave the path to having this be as successful as possible.